Okay, so what I'm hoping to do today is give you a bit of a snapshot of recent trends in Yukon's exploration industry, and also provide a bit of geologic context for the various projects that you've been hearing about here in the Yukon Pavilion over the last day and a half. And I appreciate that many of you are not geologists, so I'm not going to give an in-depth geological description, but I hope I can paint enough of a picture to give you a sense of Yukon's mineral potential. Just taking a look at the final numbers for 2018 in terms of exploration spending, you can see how we compare to our neighbors in the Cordillera, Alaska and BC, and we're more or less at the same order of magnitude of investment. In fact, we're identical to the spending in Alaska that same year. But if you compare that to the value of mineral production for the same year, we're an order of magnitude lower in terms of our value and our contribution. And there's a number of reasons for that. Doug Eaton was talking yesterday, and he speculated that it's largely due to the fact that although we have a long history of placer mining, modern bedrock exploration is relatively new to the territory. We have a modest history, and things really only got rolling in the last 15 years or so. And I'll show you some of that and hope to convince you. So these graphs show on the top the number of exploration projects per year over the last 20 years in Yukon. And then the lower graph shows exploration spending over that same time frame. And you can see both graphs, what jumps out is that peak in 2011, which was the height of the recent exploration boom. During that time, there was a lot of new discoveries, a huge amount of staking, an unprecedented level of staking. And as well, we saw a lot of projects move from grassroots discovery stage into resource definition. What's the significant difference between the two graphs here is you can see that the level of exploration spending was quite low compared to today, although the number of projects pre and post this peak are very similar. And this reflects a shift in Yukon's industry from grassroots, low stage, very low cost, modest exploration to much more aggressive exploration and more delineation of resources. So if we look at the mineral claim map and walk through the same story, this is April 1st, 2003. That's the year that the federal government devolved responsibility for managing minerals to Yukon government. And you can see a very small number of mineral claims across the territory. If we fast forward to 2011, that's the peak of our exploration boom, and just under 12% of the landmass was covered in mineral claims, and that was the most we've ever seen. And then fast forward again to end of December 2017, 2 years ago. And then last month, you can see that these projects are starting to consolidate their holdings. They're moving more into defining their resources, and the number of claims that are active are decreasing. So if we take a closer look at some of the numbers, these are the last 5 years of exploration, number of projects on the vertical scale, and they've been parsed out here based on the magnitude of spending. And as you might expect, we see a trend from the largest number of small projects, early stage grassroots, relatively low cost. And then as you go into more expensive projects, the number of projects decreases, but the spend increases. And something that stands out on this graph is you can see this year, the bar on the far right of each of these plots, this year we saw quite a decrease in the number of early stage projects. And I think to a significant extent that reflects the fact that it's pretty challenging for companies to raise capital this past year, and we certainly felt that in Yukon. The good side is that it's showing a lot of projects are moving along the pipeline to more advanced stages. The risk, obviously, is that you need a steady drip feed of discovery to keep the pipeline full. And I'll come back to that point a little bit later. So here comes the geology part, and I'll keep it pretty simple, but in broad terms, Yukon can be divided into three basic tectonic components. In the northeast, in blues and grays, this is ancestral North America. It's also called the Rentia. And this is a continent that broke off a larger continent about 200 million years ago and started drifting across the ocean. And the part that's preserved in Yukon consists of continental shelf and slope, so we're off the western edge of this paleocontinent, if you like. The central part of Yukon, this is called the Intermontane Belt in these brown and green colors. And this is a collage of rocks, very big variety of geology through here. There's remnants of island arc chains, volcanic islands similar to Laurentia or the Philippines. There's fragments of ocean crust, there's coral reefs and sediments associated, and as well there's pieces of Laurentia that broke off and drifted around. And if you picture the continent migrating westward, out in front of it, it has this assemblage of mixed rocks out front, somehow similar to the way you'd see a snowplow moving along the road. You get all this stuff out in front of the blade piling up on the leading edge, and that's largely what this intermontane belt is. It's largely rocks that formed adjacent to the continent, and that's what they have in common with one another. And then if we jump southwest again, these pinks and purple colors, that's called the insular belt. These are fragments of continents from other parts of the world. They don't share any common history with North America. They arrived here relatively late in the history, and it's only their most recent history that's shared with the Cordillera when they collided with us. So if we look at the next stage of the story, so we're accumulating this mountain belt as Laurentia, or ancient North America, drifts westward. One of the consequences of that is the crust thickens, things start to melt, and you get large volumes of magma intruding, and we have these large regions underlain by granitic bodies. They're parsed out on this map into 3 different colors, but that's what these colored polygons are, and they overprint everything. And why is this important? Well, in the context of our mineral endowment, we have a very wide range of deposit types, different ages, different mineralization styles, and different commodities. And what happens when we can parse out our deposits, we have some that predate accretion of the host terrain, some that are actually inherited by the Cordillera. They're not a product of Cordilleran processes. We have some deposits that formed in response to this magmatism, either because the magma was rich in metals and it deposited it when it intruded, or in some cases, it's just the heat from these magma bodies that drove the circulation of fluids through the crust, and metals precipitate out of those fluids as they cool. And then some of our deposits are controlled by faults. Faults form excellent pathways that channel fluids, and so we have some structurally controlled deposits in Yukon as well. We have currently in our public database about 2,700 mineral occurrences documented, and it may not sound like an enormous number when you compare us, for example, to BC, but this is over a region of about 12% of our land mass, and so it's a fairly significant number given our modest exploration history. So now I'm just going to walk us through those 3 major domains and describe some of the pre- and post-Cordilleran deposits that we have. I'm only, for the most part, showing deposits because the map will get too cluttered if I try and show all the occurrences. We have at the Invest Yukon booth a number of copies of this volume. It's our mineral deposits summary with a bit more information on these. So the circles represent 43101 compliant deposits, and the larger symbols are those deposits that belong to member companies. So you may have seen the presentations by member companies over the last couple of days. And I'll show a few occurrences, only those that are part of the YMA group of properties. So here is Mac Pass. If you saw Brandon's talk yesterday on the Fireweed Zincs projects, Tom and Jason and the newly discovered boundary zone, can see the resource here. It's one of many SEDEX deposits in this region of ancient North America. This is known as Selwyn Basin. It's a very lead zinc rich region. And the blue dots are all sedimentary exhalative or SEDEX deposits. And there's also a couple Mississippi Valley style over in the shallower regions of the basin. You can see the resources from some of these. Howard's Pass, which many of you have probably heard of, is here. And these are the Faro deposits, which are past producers, but still have a significant resource in the ground. If we go a little bit north, just outside on the margin of the basin, across this region, there's a number of locations where some of the older rocks in Yukon contain iron oxide, copper, gold, rich breccias, similar to the IOCG deposits of Australia. And Tim was talking yesterday with G10 Minerals about the Monster project that they have on the go up north of Dawson City. This one's well endowed with copper and good cobalt assays. So now we're fast forwarding through time. We're looking at the impact that the overprinting tectonic events and magmatic intrusion has had on Selwyn Basin. And again, color-coded dots, or the yellow dots represent gold deposits, the white dots are silver, and pink are tungsten skarns. And just starting with the gold deposits from west to east, here's Brewery Creek. Janet talked about this yesterday. It's Golden Predators project. They're planning to put it back into production in the next year or so, starting with remining of the heap leach tailings. You can see the resource over here on the right. Going east from there, this is the Eagle deposit of Victoria Gold's, Yukon's newest mine, 200,000 ounces a year, and you can see the reserve that they've got in the ground and lots of exploration potential. The Attack Resources Rackla Belt, Graham talked about this morning, and it's anchored on the west by the Tiger deposit, part of the Raw project, a carbonate replacement gold deposit. And at the east end and central parts, there's a number of Carolyn-style gold occurrences, including the Osiris deposits, with the resource shown here, 1.7 million ounces. Down to the southeast, Banyan's Highland Gold Project, 500,000 ounces, and I believe Banyan has is going to be in the core display later on, so have a look at their project. And then before I hop over to show you some of the silver, Mactung, this is one of, it straddles the border with NWT. It's a world-class tungsten deposit, and it's one of several occurrences and deposits in Yukon of this critical metal. Oh, and Mountain Hinton, I'm sorry, I forgot this one. Strategic, yesterday Doug talked about Strategic Resources Mountain Hinton, and this is that occurrence that's yielding some crazy grades, upwards of 2,000 grams per ton in a couple of the samples that they've got. So silver, you are familiar with, you heard Brad's presentation earlier today, the Keno District, famous for its history of silver mining. Over 200 million ounces produced so far, and they're gearing up when anticipating a water license shortly and hoping by the end of 2020 to be back in production. And then immediately east of Alexco's project is Metallic's Keno Hill Silver Project. It's on strike with those deposits. It's part of the historic region, and they've recently amalgamated the properties into one and are moving that forward. So I think there's lots of potential future for silver production in Yukon as well. So now if we jump down into the Intermontane Belt, same approach. First of all, a look at some of the pre-Cordilleran or pre-collision deposits that we have, and they're all down in this region in the Finlayson Lake District. They're volcanic associated deposits. Blue dots represent lead-zinc dominated systems, and orange dots are the copper dominated ones. And if you heard BMC speak earlier, you heard about the Kutsikaya. It's a large deposit. It's just located here west of the past-producing Wolverine mine. It's got some impressive results, and they are hoping to see it go into production in the next little while as well. And then if we, again, fast forward the clock to look at the impact of the overprinting magmatism and tectonism, this story is dominated by copper and gold. Copper is shown in the more orange colored, and I apologize, they don't distinguish very well on this screen. Copper in orange and gold again in yellow. Starting with the copper deposits, this suite of projects, Minto, Stu, and Carmax, are all on a trend. Carmax and Minto are both very interesting porphyries in that they're reworked and intruded and partially digested. They're not enormous like the Casino project you just heard about, but they've got some pretty impressive high grades. There's grades reported up to 20% copper at Minto. Minto is one of our two operating mines at the moment. If we go up to the northwest of Minto, this is the Casino project that Paul was just talking about, Yukon's biggest copper and biggest gold deposit. It's a younger porphyry than the Minto and Carmax suite, and it's same age as the Melody and Hopper occurrences that are part of the strategic package of projects. So this event, this porphyry event, had a wider footprint than just Casino, and as you heard from Paul, they're looking west adjacent to their property to expand that as well. And the gold story. Within the same region, there's a number of gold deposits, and as Paul said, it's sometimes difficult to distinguish whether a project is gold with copper or copper with gold. In that category is Mount Freegold's property. They have a number of deposits. They're rebuilding their story on that project and finding evidence of both porphyry and epithermal gold and copper. Immediately to the southwest of it, the Plaza project. This is a little bit different. It's a polymetallic system. There's carbonate, there's lead zinc, as well as gold and silver. This is Rockhaven Resources project. Up to the north, white gold. This is immediately north of Newmont's Coffee project. They've got the largest landholding in the Klondike. Upwards of 30-some projects at various stages, including a couple with resources. And then to the north of that, Klondike Gold. And if you heard Peter's talk yesterday, they're starting to rethink the role that faulting played in terms of gold emplacement and remobilization. And Peter reported one of the highest drill results last year globally. I think he had 1,000 grams gold and silver, gold each and silver on one of his drill holes. So now we're going to hop over southwest again to the Insular Belt. The deposit down in this area, known as a Wellgreen, it's been renamed Nickel Show. It was a past producer of Hudson Bay. It's a magmatic nickel-copper system, and it's got a resource left in the ground, including over 7 million ounces combined platinum and palladium, and a significant resource of cobalt. Along strike of this deposit is the Kluane project. This is Group 10. And these folks have 3 projects adjacent, all along strike, similar magmatic nickel-copper occurrences, and they're working those. And I think they've got some core over in the core shack too that I'd invite you to have a look at. There's also a number of gold occurrences in this region. These are later deposits related to Cordilleran tectonics. These are all occurrences that are owned by Strategic, and this one in particular is interesting because it's in a similar structural setting and style to the Juno Gold Belt down in southeastmost Alaska, and so it has potential to extend that trend quite a ways northward. So I mentioned earlier that the last decade or so has seen a lot of resource development in Yukon. We've moved a lot of projects forward, and if you compare on this chart the historic production of these metals with what's been newly defined in terms of 43101 reporting since 2009, so the last decade, you can see that the amount of new resource in Yukon's inventory in some cases eclipses what's been produced historically. So how do we get all this metal to market? You've heard about this already from a few speakers, including Minister Pillay yesterday when he spoke. Yukon government, Canada, and industry partners are all committed to investing in infrastructure, and in particular the regions that have been targeted are the Nahanni Range Road out here. There was just an agreement signed to move this project forward, and to upgrade and build some new road segments to connect this mineral-rich Dawson Range region to market. And as you can see, our roads do lead down to deepwater ports in southeast Alaska, in Skagway and Haines, and some ore, as Brad talked about for Alexco, will be headed down to Stewart, BC. So we have access to offshore markets in Yukon. Our power grid, this is the distribution of our power. We have 3 hydro dams that power roughly 90-odd% of our power needs. Both mines are connected to power. Minto was hooked up in 2008 or so, and Eagle Gold was connected just recently when they opened. And we've got diesel and LNG backup on our grid system as well. The minister also mentioned yesterday morning in his opening remarks that Yukon government and 11 settled First Nations in Yukon recently signed a mining memorandum of understanding. The intent of the memorandum is to identify issues of concern to First Nations and discuss how Yukon should go forward in terms of managing minerals and mineral production. One of the recent announcements coming out of the MOU, one of the initiatives, is the creation of a panel to come up with a mineral development strategy for Yukon. And that process is just getting underway. The engagement period opened, I think, this week. So if anybody's interested or wants to have input, just Google Yukon Mineral Development Strategy and you can have your say. Doug Eaton with Strategic is actually on the panel. He's one of the 3 members. So I pointed out earlier that 2019 saw a pretty dramatic drop in the number of early-stage grassroots projects. And I just wanted to mention, Yukon government has a program called the Yukon Mineral Exploration Program, or YMIP. And through that program, we provide grants to prospectors and junior miners for early stage exploration to try and stimulate new discoveries. And it's intended to leverage private investment as well. And we've had a lot of success over the years. Coffee Project is an example of a significant success under YMIP. This past year, we put $1.4 million into 33 hard rock projects. And one of the highlights was Tara Christie talked about the Oryx McQuestion project yesterday. They made a couple new discoveries on that project called the Power Line and Airstrip. And those were directly funded by a YMIP grant this calendar year, or this fiscal year rather. We also invest in public geoscience. We carry out regional mapping. We serve a lot of data over our website. And part of what we do involves trying to understand and put our mineral deposits into a geologic context and identify their ages and the controls on the mineralization to help reduce risk for exploration companies. And we've started recently reinvesting in mapping out mineral potential because there's a couple of land use planning initiatives underway, and we want to make sure that those are well informed by mineral potential information. So this curve is just a generic curve that shows the time value curve for a mineral project. And I thought I'd just plot where Yukon has sat over the timeline that I've been describing the last 20 years or so. Pre our 2011 exploration peak, as I mentioned, a lot of our projects were very early stage down in this region, fairly low spending, fairly low return. But when we saw the exploration boom ramping up in 2008, 2009, we started to see more and more projects moving up onto this part of the curve. We saw lots of new discoveries at the grassroots end, but we also saw a lot of new resources being added to our mineral inventory. And then we also, at that time, there were 3 new mines opened in that period. The Minto mine, Alexco opened the Bellakino mine, and Wolverine got into production. 2020 now, we're looking back a little bit, but we're seeing a greater emphasis on the definition of resources. I would put most of our projects now in this range, and we've got quite a number, as I mentioned, 5 of them coming into production, hopefully over the next little while, and they're all at advanced stages of permitting. Anyway, so just to wrap up then, it's still true that in terms of our mineral production, we're a very modest contributor to Canada's GDP, but I think it's fair to say that we are an emerging district, an emerging mining jurisdiction. We've got 2 producing mines, and as I mentioned, several more in the wings ready for production. What's also changing is that our exploration is really starting to delineate, instead of individual or singular deposits, we're actually starting to see mining districts emerging from the resources that are being exposed. We also have a lot of ground still greenfields, unexplored or underexplored, and a government that's committed to investing in infrastructure to provide access to companies to get at these minerals and to the markets that they need to sell them. And we're working closely with First Nations, and I think the mineral development strategy, when it's released next year, should provide some guidance and a vision for where Yukon's mining sector will go. Okay, thanks. Anybody has questions, happy to answer them.